In this episode, we meet Millie Lambess, City Safety and Harm Prevention Team Lead at Wellington City Council. Millie came to this work through community, through a belief in high trust models, flexible funding, and the idea that the best responses start from what people actually need, not what the system is designed to offer. In this episode, Millie talks about Wellington City Council's role as connector and convener across the homelessness sector, and why local government is often better placed than anyone to see the full picture. She talks about the research into women's rough sleeping in Wellington's CBD, what those women said about safety, storage, and what home actually means, and why success doesn't always look the way we expect it to. More information on this episode can be found in the episode notes. And don't forget to subscribe to the Char Hub podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from.
Kia ora, Millie, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day. I know you are extremely busy to come across the road and talk to us and inform our Chat Insights Homelessness edition. I wonder if we could just start off by you sharing a bit about yourself and your background and what brought you to the work at Wellington City Council.
Yeah, so my name's Millie. I am originally from Wellington, born in Upper Hutt, schooled up in Auckland and then came back as soon as I could. I whakapapa to Ngāti Kahungunu in the Heretaonga area, and grew up just me and my mum for most of that time. So I think a lot of my movement into sort of the social space really came from her and my upbringing with her and the morals and values that she installed in me. So I think that's where that passion started. Before I came to council, I had an interesting journey, as you know, as you do sometimes. I actually worked in the creative space. I worked in hospitality. I worked overseas, came back and worked for a charity, originally in social service in the comms space, so more of a comms role. But the longer I was there and it being a small organisation, I started moving into more of that service design, really looking at the way services are designed in a way that ensures the whānau, the taumai, the client, that they have full control over what they want and what they need, and that we weren't dictating or projecting what our thoughts were. So did some service design work around choice-based models, in particular around food banks before social supermarkets came onto that scene, and then worked in more of that emergency management space. So coming into council was about, I think it's 4 years now. Came as a community connector originally, so that was under an MSD contract, working direct with whānaus impacted by both welfare and economic impacts of lockdowns and the impact COVID had on communities. So did that for about 1.5 years, 2 years, working direct with individuals. And that was my first glimpse actually into that contract, was in the autonomy to work in that space. Having a flexi fund available meant I could respond directly to what those needs are, even if they weren't, sort of the normal type of support provided. It was even stuff like a mother who had a child with intellectual disability, so that child didn't have access to the sort of specialty toys and that to keep them entertained over an isolated period. So I could go out and source specialty toys for that child to help relieve some of the pressure on her, and then being able to look at what else in the household could we start looking at. So that was a really good insight into how that flexibility of funding in high trust models can work really effectively. I then transitioned into a community advisor, and through changes came into the harm prevention team lead role, and now city safety and harm prevention team lead. So that works very broad. a big focus obviously is our communities and strategic response to homelessness. We also look at drug and alcohol harm reduction, sexual violence, and overall city safety.
Thank you, Millie. A really important role for local government. We know from lots of these conversations that we're having, and we know from the evidence that people are interacting daily with systems, as you just said, and still not necessarily getting the support that they may need. Could you talk us through a little bit about Wellington City Council's Homelessness Coordination Service and how that operates and what it hopes to achieve?
So the development of this, and this is, I like to explain it as it's quite a exploratory service or initiative. It's really acknowledging that in particular for people that are experiencing more chronic homelessness, who've been in and out of systems, whose pathways to housing aren't available to them for many different reasons, where support is available but not attainable, the needs spread across sectors, not just social service, not just health, not just justice, that actually multi-sector responses are needed. It's acknowledging the opportunity to work outside of the systems that we know don't work, and actually try some stuff that is bespoke, that's different, that has funding behind it, that is it's a whatever it takes approach, and actually seeing what can work so we can evidence that to then go back to those that have more influence or control of commissioning of services and funding, to say for this type of situation or cohort, this is what it takes, this is what it needs. These are the gaps that we couldn't even fill through bespoke options, but this is the gaps that need to be filled if we want solutions. So I'm more on the operational level of this group alongside our partners, DCM, City Mission, He Herenga Kura and Te Whatu Ora. It's the group I'm with are sort of manager levels within those organisations, and that's given an opportunity, we've been given this mandate to do what it takes, work outside of your current service organisational structures and delivery models. Let's pull all of our resources and knowledge on the table, and then let's start putting the puzzle pieces together. And by having people, I guess, at that level that can make that call, outside of actually the box that we are meant to work in, they have that authority to be able to say, actually, yes, let's work outside of this space, or we can pull this in. And I think that's taken that next step of just information sharing to actual deep problem solving.
Yeah.
And even if what's needed isn't there, we are trying to evidence this doesn't exist, but this is what's needed.
Yeah.
And the cost of not having this equates to this. So it's been a really interesting, at times nerve-wracking, because we are working differently. So you're always sort of like, everyone wants this to work. So there's that nervousness, but that probably healthy nervousness of like, yes, we are pushing the limits, we are stepping outside, but that we're doing what it takes. Whatever's going is what that individual wants. What are their aspirations? What are their barriers to be able to make that next step? And so it's ensuring that while we are trying to push against systems, we are bringing it back to quite a micro level on the individual, and hoping through that micro level lens, being able to evidence on a bigger scale, these are the types of services or funding or commissioning models needed.
Great. Yeah. It sounds like it's a very person-centered model.
Yes.
And also could generate quite a lot of learnings.
Yes.
And we know that local governments across the country work at varying levels in responding to homelessness, and that's obviously dependent on different budgets and priorities. But I'm aware that you're also involved in a national local government homelessness network that's been established recently, Te Kauru.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the purpose of that network and why it's important for local government responses to be connected at that national level?
Yeah, definitely. Te Kauru was established maybe 2 years ago now, and it was bringing together like-minded roles within a local government setting. I think working in the homelessness space in a local government setting is there's no clear mandate. It's not black and white, and yet it changes so it's very place-based, depending on regional, rural, city environments. And so it was established by a handful of local government entities, and it was developed to be sort of like a community of practice space, a space for the different teams that work in the space to come together to share ideas, to share the challenges, the learnings, bit of a peer support space as well, to really discuss some of the challenges, because a lot of the answers actually might already be there in other areas of the country. So how do we learn from each other? That has grown to more councils coming on board. I know through Peniel, that was at Tauranga at the time, we were able to go and support that when they established the Homelessness Summit last year, and it was really great for us to all be to arrive in person and be there together to discuss. We had a whole day around local government's role in homelessness to brainstorm, and there's some work underway to sort of develop a bit of a handbook, acknowledging the differences that we all in the spaces that we work in, funding-wise, community makeup-wise, but here are some of the things that can work, that people can look at when in a local government role. I think it's just a great sort of space just to bounce ideas off. That space has also been used to kind of to centralise some of the data. I know HUD's come to some of those meetings through their data insights team. So trying to bring it all together rather than our little corners all the time.
So Millie, earlier you mentioned the importance of listening to people and their needs. Mm-hmm. And I know Wellington City Council recently commissioned research on women's homelessness, which you were involved in. What are some of the key findings of that research, and what do they tell us about women's experiences of homelessness?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes, so we did undertake a piece of work on lived experience, trying to understand wahine Māori's perspectives and experiences of rough sleeping in Wellington CBD, and to also try to understand their safety needs or the way that they utilise the streetscape in wider city to keep safe while they're in that position. Obviously, that's not a position we want people to be in, but the reality is they are there. And council does have a mandate around, the management of public spaces and the way people use spaces. So that really clear focus and insight would give us some really good insight and knowledge into how we look at those public spaces. Some of the key learnings, and I think through the research, I wouldn't want to say there's nothing groundbreaking, but it gave us some really clear practical insight and tools that we may talk about loosely, but it really grounds it. So things like the role of lighting, the role of CCTV cameras. There was a clear area between our train station, the police station, and our library. Became a bit of a triangle that once was mentioned as a key area that wahine would strategically position themselves in. It had oversight with CCTV coverage. It had high levels of pedestrians walking past, the role of security around, and the lighting. Really, really good insight into the role that people play. So, there's narratives that are going around about the visibility of homelessness and the concern that makes around safety in the city, but actually people being visible when they're experiencing homelessness is a safeguard that they use, because you walking past them and seeing them, you become a safeguard that they have been seen. It means there's been a lot of quotes about the wahine positioning themselves in spaces that are visible enough that they can run into a crowd if something happens, but not too visible where they're going to be a target.
Yeah.
And so I think that insight's really important for us to understand. Stuff like storage and the role of always having to keep track of what you have, and the psychological toll that plays when you're constantly surveilling your belongings, and the impact that means in not being able to access services or go to appointments or travel on public transport. Some really good things around even access to civil engagement. I think often I've utilised this research in some conversations I have around whose voice are we listening to? Whose voice are we prioritising? and how do we balance that view on who we're listening to and why we're listening to people, certain parts of our community. Council is there to serve the entirety of community and all aspects of that. And sometimes we aren't very good at listening to those that may not have the platform to share their experiences and their voice. So how can we facilitate space to do that? Some really important stuff around aftercare and housing. And I think that's something for the whole sector to reflect on is, when someone goes into a house, when that door closes and the silence comes, that's when everything starts coming up. And actually a lot of harm happens in housing and in bedrooms, especially for women. So our idea that, 4 walls equals safety isn't the reality for many people. And so we really need to, I think, start unpacking some of that in terms of what does success looked out like. And the success isn't always what we think success looks like. And we need to, I think, as a society come to a level of understanding there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as a result of those findings, Millie, how might councils and communities respond differently?
Yep, I think, even some really basic things around our public toilets. How long are they open to? Are they open throughout the night?
Yes.
Do we have signage, wayfinding in our city to where these public facilities are so people can, get to meet their basic needs? How are we communicating the services that our city has to offer? Is it only in platforms that require a level of access to read and see and go online to access that information? I think really acknowledging the role that our frontline library staff, community centre security staff, they play such an integral role in terms of just seeing someone without it being but seeing someone without it needing to get into a serious social work setting, of just being able to be seen as a human and being acknowledged and building that soft touch of relationship. So over time, some trust could be built to then refer someone to engage in formal service settings. So I think there's some really practical tools in particular for council to look at and reflect on.
Yes.
Because the facilities and the spaces we operate in are the spaces that people experiencing homelessness do use. And how can we provide that space as for healing and a stepping stone to getting future support?
Absolutely. And some of those tools is just about actually giving people a sense of dignity and well-being, right? Yeah.
I think we often jump straight to intensive social support, medical support, which is needed for many at some point. But what are those stepping stones before that as a community we can step into and be confident to step into?
Nice.
Yeah.
Millie, I know the role of councils, and many councils around the country, is to support outreach services that engage with people experiencing homelessness. Why, in your view, do you think local government are well placed to do this work?
Yes, I think for outreach, I think on a really sort of operational level, for Wellington City Council, we are very close to the community. Our access from community to engage with us is really accessible. So we get tickets or calls related to people that are concerned about someone, or have a welfare concern, or have a concern for their own safety. Sometimes it's true, there's probably some that probably should go to more emergency services, but a lot of tickets and information and notifications come from the public to us. And so that in itself means we are probably perfectly positioned to then work alongside outreach, so that we can ensure if there are welfare needs or if there is outreach needed for someone that is new to the street or an encampment or a tent's popped up in the bush, we can work with them to ensure that support is offered first, and we can really build that trust and engagement before going straight to sort of by law enforcement or ticketing and anything like that. That's a last resort, but we can work strategically with outreach to make sure that that person has access to the support that they need.
Yeah.
We can understand a bit more about their situation to make a bit more informed approach from a council lens on how we respond to each individual case.
Yeah, nice. Millie, you spoke earlier about exploratory work and innovation, and I know councils often have a role in maybe seed funding organisations.
Yeah.
How does Wellington City Council help to build the capacity and the capability of community organisations in the sector?
The way we work, I think one aspect is the way we work in terms of the relationships we hold, because we are quite close to the ground, to the community, and a lot of the relationships around funding or projects or partnerships, we work very closely. So we do have that opportunity to really see and understand needs of different services or the community and see where those gaps are. Because we hold relationships across such a broad range of providers in different sectors and areas, we're able to play that connector at many times of actually, for example, through our sexual violence prevention work and one of our prevention providers who does training and capability building around bystander intervention and sexual violence prevention. We know that when we've funded some of the development of that, they provide that sort of capability building, so we can now, we know over this organisation over here is dealing with some challenges in that space and needs some support or understanding, so we can link them up. So I think, because we work so broadly, it has its challenges because, we are still a relatively small team, but it means we can bring in connections in different sectors to work on capability building or problem solve challenges collectively.
Yeah. It sounds like you have a really important systemic weaving role across, because you're in a position where you can kind of actually look across the sector, but also work alongside central government as well. We also know that good data is really important in shaping policy and services and solutions. What role does Wellington City Council play in supporting collective data sharing?
I think because we do, through different funding contracts and even through our own operations, we do have access to quite a broad range of data. In particular for homelessness, so we get our data from the community in terms of their notifications and concerns, and through outreach we can get that data on what they're responding to and the people they're coming across. So it gives us an opportunity to get some really good oversight. Data, especially in homelessness, is really tough. Even, to be honest, over all of our sort of portfolio areas is really tough. But we do have specialty in-house that can support that analysis. And I think when it comes to community level, I think we're asking, there's a lot of different organisations or government organisations and council asking for a lot around data. And how can we better streamline that to take some of that high administrative burden off, because we are asking for the same stuff. And so how can we better coordinate in the background, or who is the lead for data? Because it's not clear. We do have a really good understanding in Wellington, and that's because of the great work that DCM does and the funding contracts we have with them and the data we access through our own operations. But there is a bit of a gap there in how data across agencies is captured. I think there's lots of little pockets that are really good. Even through, we set up a regional network on regional councils around homelessness, and even trying to, how do we get a regional lens on from a data space? That data's captured so differently in different areas that it's actually really hard to get a full view.
And I'm aware you do some work on the housing pipeline work too, don't you?
Yes, the housing pipeline map. So that was a collaborative piece of work, but got developed a few years ago. It took a few years to get up and running, and I think this is a really good example of collaborative and collective data projects. So this was between council, HUD, HAO and Community Housing Aotearoa. And it is a map to give a full bird's eye view of Wellington City around what is the current housing supply. So that's looking at both transitional and social housing, as well as what are pipeline or refurbishments or developments coming up. And that, I think, gives a really good lens around planning to actually see where is the current supply, the typography of the current supply, where are they located in comparison to amenities. If there's, for future developments, where are those key places that they could be? It means that across those agencies, they collectively can see that full map, not just their own stock, but majority of the stock across Wellington. And I think that's a good example of how that sort of work can give better insight for future planning.
Absolutely. And do you think acknowledging that each region is very different, is that something that could be replicated in other areas, or the learnings be shared from?
I think so, yes. Yeah. I think that's would be that next step. And, I think having KO and HUD and CHAR already on board, how can that be replicated at a higher level, whether it's a regional or national level, especially with those organisations being national organisations. Yeah.
And speaking of collaboration, we know sector collaboration is really important, and councils have a key role in convening and supporting. Could you talk a little bit about some of the work that you do in that space at Wellington City Council?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the roles we do play is facilitator, and as a connector, bringing people together. One example is what's called the Homelessness MDT group, that's been running for many, many years. It came out of the previous Te Mahana strategy. And that is a group of a variety of frontline providers that work in the homelessness space, as well as some government agencies, to come together and discuss certain themes, what's going on, is there new barriers, what are people seeing, is there new people coming in. It's a space to connect, to problem solve, to share information. I think the last one we had last week, Evolve came for the first time, and they spoke about what they're seeing in the youth homelessness space. That is a growing trend around Wellington, and so historically that's not really been a focus in Wellington. So that was great for all of the other agencies to hear from them about what they're seeing and who they're seeing come through their doors. And that means now they will have some more connections across the sector. So it's those sort of spaces, providing the space for discussion to come. It doesn't mean we have to lead it, but it's providing that for sectors or community.
Thank you, Millie. So, Millie, the research that you recently undertook around understanding the experiences of wahine Māori rough sleeping in Wellington and their safety needs, who was it exactly that you spoke to and engaged with for that research, and how did you go about it?
So to undertake this piece of work, and we had a lot of reflection on how to do it, and understanding that this was lived experience, it was of sensitive nature, potentially would bring up for anyone that was a part of it some really tough period of their life. So we were very careful in how we wanted to approach this as well, because it is for wahine Māori, so it needed to be culturally appropriate for them. And so we brought on Weaving Insights, Nanwei Peihana and Moira Potama came on board, and they are the ones that delivered the research. When we were working with them to get it developed, hoping for at the minimum 10 participants, the criteria was quite specific, that they needed to have rough slept in Wellington CBD over the last 3 years, but that they were currently housed in at least transitional or permanent housing. So through that process, we brought on Te Whare Nuku Noa and DCM to play that relationship and connector role to wahine. And so they worked with the researchers in terms of building that rapport and that trust with wahine to be involved. As well, they were really clear that it was all very consent-based. Information was really clearly brought to them, so they knew exactly what they were going to be involved in, and that the interview process was very much led by the wahine, that it was in a space of their choosing. They could have support there. There was a wānanga held at a marae out in Kapiti Coast, where a group of wahine were taken to spend the day there and to do some of the interviewing more in a a wānanga space that was supportive and culturally appropriate. And part of the commission of this, we ensured that we had a budget aside for aftercare. So acknowledging that some of the stories may bring up past trauma or bring up things to the surface that they may not be ready to sort of resolve. So we ensured that there was aftercare support provided for those that wanted it, and that could have been used in anything from mirimiri to rongoa to counselling to massage. So ensuring that was offered as well, to make sure the ethics of it was done well, because a lot of harm can happen in those spaces, with not intentionally, but I think without some really deep thinking around the care side, it can cause harm. And also ensuring that we're not doing this research for the sake of doing it, and ensuring that the researchers were given an adequate amount of time to build trust and rapport. All the interviews wouldn't be done in a month as soon as we started. That actually took probably 6 months. With a total of 16 wahine involved all up. But you needed that flexibility to take things at their pace. And then what the outcome was, some really, really beautiful and deep insight into their experiences.
Millie, thank you for ensuring the voices of people experiencing homelessness, wahine in particular, are heard and meaningfully listened to. And I really hear when you say and talk about the deep care that's needed. As we've done some of these interviews, we have also heard that the sector can be often quite siloed. And I think you've really articulated the role of local government so well today in terms of your convening and connecting role that you play in supporting and actually creating the conditions for collaboration. So I just want to thank you sincerely for the work that you do. We're really lucky to have you and Say Hi at Wellington City Council doing this mahi. And yeah, really encouraged as well to hear about the national network that's working in this space too. So nā mihi nui.
We'd like to thank Millie for taking the time to speak with us for this episode. More information on this episode can be found in the episode notes. And don't forget to subscribe to the Cha Hub podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from.